Okay. All right. Well, welcome y'all to uh, this session of the Full Stack Forum on May 15th. It's hard to believe it's already May 15th of 2026. Seriously. There are times when it feels like it is going slower than molasses, and then other times where it's like, what? It's already end of the school year? I can't believe it. All right. We are going to be talking today about, I like to use the term ambiguity. I use it with a lot of people. It's something that I think comes up a lot in technical and non-technical conversations, and we deal with it all the time. Like I learned the word in context a lot in my earlier days of coding when dependency injection was just becoming a thing. And one of the errors that it had was, you know, ambiguous selection of service or whatever. And I was like, what does that even mean? But I was getting it all the time. And it's because it never knew, with the code never knew which implementation do you want me to use? Which thing do you want me to use here? So we work with ambiguity. We work with a lack of clarity all the time. It's baked into our jobs, and I don't care if you're a software developer. I don't care if you're a network engineer. If you're doing data, like it's everything becomes ambiguous, such to the point it's so superfluous that this past week with my kids' school, they gave the kids a form. And this form, it says that it's for the final exam exemptions, right? And here I am not expecting my kid to be exempt from any exams. Like, my kid, you're like, he's probably not going to be exempt from anything. But it says on the top, the instructions are like, hey, you have to have an 80 for the year, an 80 average for the year, and each teacher has to fill out the things. And one of the columns says, like, fall average. There's no column for the average so far in the spring, right? How many absences? It also says you have to have less than 5 absences. You have to have no fines, right? And no disciplinary action. In the rule for the 80 for the year, it says it's 80 for the year, right? For full year classes, but the average for the half year classes are, so it's here you got a set of rules. And I have teachers who aren't filling it out, who are basically like, oh, you're not going to be exempt, and saying, I won't put any information down. And then another teacher who puts stuff in, even though the grade was right. And me and my wife at home are like, what does this even, like, what is the calculation? How does it work? Like, there's not enough information here to really understand to even hold the teacher accountable to what they're putting in, because this has to be handed in to the assistant principal for that grade level, and they're going to make the final determination. But like, we don't have access. We don't know what they're actually doing. So my point is, even in the documents that we deal with every single day, there's a ton of ambiguity. And how do we deal with it? How do we seek clarity? So what I did in that case was I because I'm a special kind of guy, I knew that my 10-year-old was going to baseball to play in the tournament for the end of season on the first night of that tournament. His team got in there. So I also knew that the high school principal has a kid on another team who was playing. So I figured out where they were playing that night and what time. And I made sure I stuck around, and I ran into him and said, hey, man, I hate to do this to you. Like, well, how are things going? I said, well, I don't want to, I have something I want to ask you. I don't really want to talk shop, figure out your kid's game or whatever. But do you think you could spare some time tomorrow morning? And kind of put the screws to him a little bit to schedule time with me and have a discussion. And we did. I went there, I met with him, right? And then he gave me his look on the rules and said, all this stuff, these are all the ones that are exempt, and it's only the half semester. And lo and behold, a day later, after getting all that information, I found out from the documentation of the district that he was wrong. And even he didn't see what the requirements were clearly. So ambiguity affects us all, right? We as software developers especially thrive on well-defined process and well-defined flows and things like that. Okay. So that's an example for me of how I try to seek clarity to proceed and figure things out. We saw how long that took, days to figure out, right? Literally, it took me 3 days to get from we don't understand this to the actual what's going to happen and what documentation do I have to prove it. Question I want you guys to think about real quick to open up and start a conversation about is when you don't have enough clarity to proceed cleanly, what do you usually do next? What's your next step? You're up, Joseph. Jump in.
I mean, that largely depends on where I'm working and who I'm working with. I've said many times before that I think velocity is directly proportional to communication. And if you're in a team where you're comfortable, no one's going to say, hey, this guy's an idiot. You're really quick to say, hey, this doesn't make sense. Anybody got some input on it? And you can just throw it out in the chat. And, if it's a really good team, people are, you get 10 responses. You're like, okay, now I'm good to go. And that ambiguity is quickly sorted out, or you realize, no, nobody has an answer. And now you just get the free reins to do whatever you want and try to solve the best you can. And sometimes, obviously that's very rare to be in a place like that. I think I end up defaulting to seeing if I can get the answer. If it's too painful to get clarity, it's I'll seek forgiveness later. And if someone has a problem with the way it's done, the person that has the answer for clarity will chime in and say, hey, we didn't want it done this way. This is how we want it. And I find sometimes that saves probably 50% of the time going back and forth of, no one said what color they wanted it, so I made it purple. And then they chimed in and said, this is supposed to be green. Like, okay, well, now we got that answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Best judgment, right? Like, I think that's what most of us tend to default to is, let me make the best judgment call I can make, even at the lowest levels. I think it's a pretty important point to consider. Like that word is something that I've been focusing on a lot lately. Judgment is the first thing in the RU full stack set of things that we help people develop, which is becoming, from everyone I've been talking to in senior leadership positions, when it comes down to interns and entry level positions, like what is the job of a software developer? What is the job of a data engineer now? Like now with AI, I finally have what I've always wanted. I have at my fingertips a person or a thing that can do all the typing for me. So what is my job now, since that's no longer my job? And the first thing that comes down to is this exact topic. It's your judgment. You guys, think about this a little bit, come up with, or not come up with, but tell me if you feel free to raise your hand if you want to, but if you have a story about like how judgment was a more important role in what you did than doing the thing, right? I want to hear that, especially where it intersects with, hey, we had some really unclear requirements, right? We had some real ambiguity about what we could do. While you think about that, I'm going to tell you about something very recently that happened to me, where so I am now in modern day working with systems and cultures that are really trying to figure out how our world in software development and software development adjacent roles is trying to adapt, how we're going to adapt. Because everything we've done so far, the software development lifecycle as we've known it for the last 30 years is changing significantly. So what does that look like with AI? How does AI fit into the software development process? And a lot of it is trying to provide the context so that we can clear up that ambiguity. But in this state, what is happening and what we're seeing a lot of is non-coders submitting code. And I just had this week. And what are our processes for this? We've built the places I work. We have built our processes around code review and pull requests, getting things to production and solving problems. We've built that around the people who are doing it having an expertise in that area, even if it's a new expertise, right? We have the guardrails in place to check for that, right? So in this situation, what had happened is we got somebody who's got coding technical ability, right? But doesn't write production code. Like I won't call it out, but think of like a technical product manager, right? Has the ability to write the code, but that's not the primary function of their role. Who decided to pick up a bug and submit the code in a PR. And me and the other seniors involved look at this and go, this is touching code in a mission critical path of our system. And even just at that, like we started getting concerned. We started getting concerned about the idea of, hey, we don't actually care who writes the code, right? But all of the other processes we have in place, the planning, the notification of the business this is being worked on, that getting that particular bug listed as something that is being fixed in this sprint, all those processes were just circumvented. So how do we deal with even that level of ambiguity? Joseph.
Yeah, I think you're circling something there about kind of letting non-technical people into what we do, and it circles back to kind of ambiguity a lot. And I'm just going to make a very fictitious example doesn't completely hold water. But you have a feature request to add phone numbers for a user. It would be really easy to hop on AI and say, hey, add a new column for phone number in the DB and, give us an input field for the phone number. To a non-technical user, there might be no ambiguity there. To us, there would be, because it's how do you want to handle the past users? And only someone that's kind of has an idea of how the systems work, has a technical understanding. So both the technical skills and the systems level understanding would say, well, how are we handling past users? We have 500,000 records in here that don't have a phone number. Do we just want to leave them null? What happens if we leave them null? Is the downstream, maybe you're only on the back end doing this, and how is the client side going to respond? Is it going to error out because it's a null? Does it expect an empty string? So, I think a lot of the ambiguity does arise from a technical knowledge, is I guess my point.
Is another way of saying that the technical knowledge allows us to identify the ambiguity that is generally ignored.
Yeah, you just said it in 2 sentences.
People. Yeah. I want to be sure I was understanding that, right? Because I mean, I think that's a great point, right? You know, I've been working and talking with people locally, you know, these business owners who now have access to systems that can help them build what they've always dreamed of building for their business. You know, one of the big problems in business with software has always been the fact that I can build an entire system and have like umpteen number of integrations to help me with that, right? And now I'm paying out the wazoo in subscriptions for my business for things I need. So it's very attractive to say, I'm going to build a piece of software that handles a bunch of that and like reduce the number of subscriptions I have to pay for a cost savings benefit. And with the tools that we have in place today, and I'm not talking about specialized tooling in AI, I'm talking about Cursor and Replit. Okay. These tools allow people to develop what looks to be production grade usable software, right? And it works on their MVP. And the question I always have to ask them is when they're looking at this, well, we want to bring this to production. Now, we think this could be a product that we could also sell to other people. The question I have to ask them is, how are you handling change? Right? How are you looking at this? And the smart ones go, I'm not technical, so I don't see everything, right? I worry about security. I worry about that. Other people will go, just use it, just use it. They have this sense of urgency involved, which we've talked about before. So there is a good point here to saying the ignorance of ambiguity causes us to be susceptible to further technical debt. Well, I was going to say that, you know, ambiguity often gets looked at as a management only problem. And as it turns out, Joseph has already correctly pointed out that we're not creating the ambiguity as technical people. We're simply the knowledge center, the context awareness to remove that ambiguity. AI is getting better at asking questions, right? But Tabitha, I'm curious as if there's anything like this in the data science world.
Oh, definitely. Well, not just definitely the data science world. In fact, most of the job descriptions that I'm reading these days, because I'm currently unemployed and reading quite a few of them, all mention the ability to work with ambiguity. So it's definitely a skill that is needed in data science. But it's difficult. It's difficult to proceed whenever you don't have the details, and the details are what makes the answer correct, right? So, but I am kind of also building with AI, and I'm not a software engineer, and I do think a lot about, for example, security and scaling and how all of those things that I do not, those aren't in my wheelhouse. So I get nervous building with AI because I know that I won't be able to spot those. It's positive that I do have an awareness that that could be an issue, but I also don't have the ability to spot the exact issues, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm actually really happy that you brought up what you're trying to do there, because I think it speaks to the point of we recognize that in the jobs that we do, that we consider ourselves professionals in, right? We recognize the fact that ambiguity is what we're tasked with exposing and eliminating. Okay. But my question to you is, as you get this whole thing that you said, you're developing software and you are aware of where to be concerned, right? Judgment, good judgment, is one of the areas that is one of the things that is a cure to, not a cure. It's what we need in order to eliminate ambiguity ourselves, right? How do you plan to develop that ability within software development that you're experimenting with? Like, do you have an idea, or are you just accepting the risk currently in what you're doing?
I have ideas, and they start with doing research, and most likely will end with asking people who know better than me. But
Right.
I've never had a problem asking questions. Like, some people I know, I think, avoid asking questions for fear of looking dumb, but I don't know if it's the fact that I was a teacher, but for me, asking questions makes you look smart, because if you don't ask questions, you're just accepting, what you know. But asking questions gives you more information, and more information is almost always a good thing.
Do you think, Tabitha, that if you went and did all the studies, get a degree, certification, whatever, I don't really care about the end result, right? But let's say you took the classes, right? You took the classes for software development, right? Understood, and whatever, and you invested your time into that, or you're doing micro learning is what I'm hearing you say, right? Do you think that purely the technical aspect of learning how to do that is sufficient to get that good judgment in
No.
the questions that I know that when you develop that plan, AI is asking you questions like, which one of these ways should I go?
Right.
And you're like, I'm recommended.
I don't know. No, I don't think technical courses teach the judgment that's needed for real expertise. I think that experience is where that comes from. And I'm reminded of a famous saying, you don't know what you don't know, right? So, I think that as I'm building software, I'm thinking about governance, security, scaling, but there could be other things involved that I'm not thinking about because I don't, haven't had any exposure to those realms.
I had a couple of business guys, relatively well known in this town, who are, as I said in my example, they've got something built. The one guy who's been building it is perhaps semi-technical, so not totally non-technical, and approached me about bringing somebody in and helping them get their technical foundations in this project that they've been doing for a month and a half. And so I proposed to them, hey, let's do this. Let's do this period of a few weeks here where I dig in and give you an example or give you some documentation about those things. That scalability. What's your plan? What's the plan for that? What's the architecture look like, and where does it need to go? And yet the response has kind of been like, and that's going to, of course, that's a statement of work. That's going to cost you X, right? And then we'll do another statement of work with more of a plan, specifically what we're going to do, right? And this is a situation, the reason I'm bringing it up, this is a situation of pure ambiguity. I've had 2 conversations, right? I've not seen any of the code. I've not seen the product, nothing. And it's been developed over the last month and a half with an AI coding tool. Okay. So in this, of course, now it's kind of like, well, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars for this first 3 weeks, and then there's no price on what we're going to do because I don't know what to do. In that situation, and I realize I'm sitting here saying, like, asking you guys to give your opinion on something that maybe you've not experienced or don't know much about, but I also know that the 2 of you, I actually trust your judgment quite a bit. In that situation, what do you think is going on in their heads? These business owners, one of whom is semi-technical, right? Who has been given a statement of work, who's been said that we're going to have this period of advisory where I'm going to figure out what's going on and give you this documentation. And they're going, we were looking maybe for more of a set of milestones. What do you think is going on in their heads with this new world of AI going on that they've taken advantage of? What do y'all think is going on in their heads?
I think they probably trust the AI and have heard a lot of success stories, which I feel like maybe haven't had the time to actually reveal that they are non-success stories, if you know what I mean. Like people
Right.
are saying, oh, I've built this and but it hasn't been that long. So you don't know truly like what the end result's going to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they're putting a lot of trust in the results. And as a data scientist, I know exactly how AI works, and there's no reason to put trust in it. It's not thinking, it's predicting the next most common word. It's not even, it doesn't even have words. They're numbers and it's mine. So I know not to trust it. But I use it and I get a lot of benefit out of it, but I know not to trust it completely.
Wait, we're not trusting the stateless thing?
The indeterministic mechanism, right?
Probabilistic machine.
Come on, man.
No, I think you're hitting at a broader point there, though. Is that, and I think there's a 2 folds comes from your little business problem there. Nobody likes ambiguity because what they're facing is ambiguity. Is this going to be crazy expensive? Is it going to be easy? Could I get AI to solve it? And there's uncertainty, and business uncertainty is extremely uncomfortable. And then from the developer point of view, you're facing ambiguity, and that the people you're dealing with don't like that ambiguity, yet you've got to wade through it. So it's kind of a double-edged thing there going on.
Yeah. I'm not going to reveal the specific industry in which this exists, right? But trust me when I say it's one of those industries, one of those places where uncertainty is only measured as uncertainties. The only word they use for uncertainty is risk. That's how I'll put that, right? So risk management is a huge topic there. And I do think that this covers it, because we talked a little bit about this like last session. We talked about escalation in the last session and how a big part of properly escalating things is risk management, right? And me having a degree in information systems management, like one of the biggest pieces of getting that degree back in 2014, 2018, at those years was the fact that, like, in project management, the biggest thing that you have to deal with is risk. Like that's the only thing businesses care about, right? Like when it boils down to it, how much money is a business willing to pay to mitigate, not necessarily mitigate, to handle risk? Because there's 4 ways to handle risk, right? Ambiguity creates that risk, right? So you're right on it being a double-edged sword. Not only does bringing up and exposing ambiguity show them risk, show people risk that they did not necessarily knew they had before, right? You also have to deliver the bad news that even you may not be fully aware of the risks that have been uncovered yet. You may not be, you business owners, you may not be aware of risks, and I may not be aware of risks, and you have to account for that somehow in your calculations, right? So ambiguity is a massive indicator of risk. The value, what then do you think is the value of uncovering ambiguity?
What I think and what other people think are 2 different things. I mean, uncovering it's extremely valuable, and oftentimes when you point it out to your manager, they find it very unsettling.
I just think anything worth doing is worth doing right, right? And so uncovering that ambiguity from the beginning and exposing it, doing what you can to solve it, is going to eventually end up in a better product. So, you know, it's super important, but I think that some people who aren't same minded as us may want to sweep it under the rug and, you know, see if we can work without it, without fixing it or whatever.
Absolutely. Oftentimes we go into positions, and I mean, Tabitha, you and I have had the benefit of working with somebody who is what I would call a risk and ambiguity warrior, okay, who refuses to let the unanswered questions remain unanswered questions. So oftentimes we go into places, and I would call them mostly toxic places, where exactly what you said, ambiguity gets swept under the rug because it's uncomfortable. And what we don't realize is that when you do that, that ambiguity now becomes operationally expensive. Because the ambiguity, it doesn't matter how much you sweep ambiguity or uncertainty under a rug, you're still going to feel it. There's still a bump in that rug. Okay. And when that is felt but not structured, when there's no structure around the management of it, right? It becomes operationally expensive. It in my opinion, it's one of the core definitions of technical debt, or you can just call it a debt. I don't know if it's technical. I don't know if it's cognitive. I don't know if it's what the right term was, right? But it is operational debt in a way, because you now got these bumps and these kinks that you aren't managing and will rear their ugly head, right? So how do we? The next question becomes like, okay, well, we have a tough job, right? All of us here, right? Because it doesn't really matter if you're a software developer or you're technology adjacent, you're working with data, right? I mean, honestly, it's hard enough to explain to most business people why, from a math perspective, you probably shouldn't average an average. Okay. And yet that's precisely what my kid's school is doing for his grades to make determinations on whether or not he can be exempt for a final exam, right? I started to make that point to the principal and to the assistant principal of special education, and stopped less than a sentence into it, because I was like, I'm just going to accept what their policy is and not try to argue the mathematics of it. It did help that I was very aware of myself, because on that, as opposed to today where I'm wearing my Goonies Never Say Die shirt, I was wearing my I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right shirt. So I decided to not pull that off. But what do we do, right? What are some ways with our difficult job where we have to expose the ambiguity to people? I know for a fact we get lost in trying to argue the right way, when in truth, we can't argue the right way. We don't necessarily have the benefit of understanding the business side of the equation, which is where a lot of the resolution to ambiguity comes, because you're talking about a risk management situation, right? So unless you're specifically knowledgeable and trained in risk management, right, it's actually quite hard to make these decisions. And I'm going to tell you that most local business owners who aren't in industries that deal with risk management are not people who are trained in risk management either. So there's a 4-part discipline that we can utilize here. Okay. We don't want it swept under the rug. So the first part, name the uncertainty. Name the ambiguity, name the uncertainty, whatever you want to call it. We want to name that. Okay. The next step is, what's the working model here? Right? We can name what the uncertainty is, right? And going back, Joseph, to your example, let's just take the simple thing, right? How do we write the working model? Well, okay. So we have a ticket, we're asked to do something. There's ambiguity or a lack of clarity around color choice selection for this particular button or component, right? So we can look back, we can try to resolve it, right? And say, well, we have a design system that someone did that's old, maybe 10 years ago, and not a lot of people followed it, right? But if I go back to that, right, this is a button that has a potentially very negative or dangerous impact. So I'm going to make it red. Resolution of ambiguity, when it's up to our own judgment, makes us think about context that perhaps our AI system doesn't have, right? Maybe the AI system doesn't know about the design model in that. So write the working model is actually a practice. It's a lot like journaling. It's like, okay, I'm at this decision point. I've exposed this. Do I have information from somewhere else that I can use to put together, this is what I can do. Do I need approval to do it? Can I do it on my own? There's these certain pieces, right? So the pieces are, do I have enough information on this ambiguity to make a decision based on my own judgment that I can be confident in? If not, then do I have enough information to put together a list of options that I can now escalate this for? Okay. Hey, I've run into this blocker. Oh, now we're getting into our morning stand-up or whatever little ceremony that we're doing on a daily basis in our jobs. Okay. Hey, I run into a blocker. I don't have enough information to deal with this. This is the problem. This is the question. Here are our options. I need a decision from someone. And if the decision is proceed with your best judgment, then you now have documented permission to proceed. That's writing the working model. That's documenting the working model. Okay. Along with that is defining the next bounded action. Hey, what am I going to take? I need a decision. or I'm going to step forward and go with this. Just define it. Define it and document, right? Anything that you do with that working model, with the next action, if there is still an unresolved risk in doing this, and again, I realize our example, Joseph, is relatively simple. You know, no one's dealing with button colors as an emergency situation, I hope. And if you do, please get a new job, right? In that particular example, right, the risk is that there is still an unresolved risk of, without guidance from the business, the risk of using the red button colors. We might scare people off from using this feature because it's red. Okay. People don't want to click the red button. So those are the 4 pieces, and I'll name them again. 4 pieces for ambiguity discipline are: name the uncertainty, write the working model, define the next bounded action, and track any unresolved risk. You want to clarify versus stall if you can. When we see that we're stalling, right, we should be looking at ourselves going, what is my fear in seeking clarification here, right? That's an all in here sort of thing, right? We don't want to take the steps. Better judgment is not proceeding anyway. Better judgment is recognizing what you're capable of, when you're capable of, and what you are specifically comfortable taking ownership of. If you know it's not a big deal to change a button's color and it's not going to do something, then by all means, trust your own judgment, right? But document the risk. So with that, I want to open up to y'all on the questions of I've given you the 4-part ambiguity discipline here, how we're intersecting with judgment, with ownership, with how we escalate, which we've discussed before, right? And like, are you guys starting to perhaps see a relationship between these topics that we've been talking about? And do you think, so the answer was yes. I saw both of you nod. I'm just doing that because you know what Google does with recordings? It literally only focuses on me and then like flops back and forth until talk, right? So my question actually is, if you see how these things are sort of starting to piece together as far as the relationship between this stuff, do you really think that it's at all known in our regular jobs? Like, is this even thought about, how these non-productive, non-provable skill sets actually happen every single day without, like, is that, do you think that's recognized in your jobs? This is what I'm trying to ask.
I think it's recognized and it's not named. And for example, we've all worked with somebody that we would say is great to work with. And some of those people are really good at escalating things and wording it. They're really good at storytelling. And they do it in a way that they don't come across as stupid. They don't come across as arrogant. They walk a tightrope and they come across as like they're trying to do a good job. And we can see it, but we don't name it. And then we all know the person that's like a jerk, but they're like really good at what they do. And they're just like, that's Bob, leave him in the corner. Don't bother Bob. And we don't name that, like, Bob's not very good at understanding how to talk to humans.
Yeah, I think it is rare for people to have both technical ability and really good communication skills and those people skills. So, yeah, it is rare. That's why I think kind of the best people are able to go back and forth between the two.
I think that's it's actually great to hear that from y'all because I've been looking for these patterns and trying to explain it to people for years. That what comes across as being a good communicator is not that you do it a lot. And please don't misunderstand me. I completely understand how extraordinarily long-winded I am in everything I do. So a lot of communication has never been a problem for me. The quantity of communication has never been a problem for me. But I have had a lot of trouble in all my years fine-tuning the quality of that communication. What it actually benefits people, what actually helps people to improve in ways. And I've had a lot of practice with helping people improve technically. There's usually relatively simple answers for improving technically. I will take on more mentorship this summer for young people who are looking to get more exposure to the kinds of technologies I have a lot of experience in. I have no doubt those young people are going to very much learn a whole lot about their technical skill sets, but what I actually hope they learn more is what's a better way of working? How do we help you improve your judgment, right? And to be perfectly blunt about it, I'm coaching, I've been coaching soccer. I've got kids in summer baseball now, and I'm a coach for summer baseball. So in the same vein, that judgment that I'm trying to teach adults, I'm also trying to teach kids in a different thing, right? On a baseball field. But I think there's honest parallel. Better judgment when you're uncertain. It looks a lot quieter than I think people expect. It's not so loud. And I think that lines up specifically with what Joseph was saying about, hey, it's recognized, but it's not named. And because it's not named, people don't understand how valuable it is in their work. This is another thing where as we get further into this, man, AI is changing the face of all of our jobs, right? We cannot rely on AI to have good judgment. So that becomes our jobs. And people are going to be very quick to go, well, that just means software developers become glorified QA people. That's not true. That's not true at all. Right? It does increase the importance of QA and code reviews, right? But I will end up having a conversation, or I'll end up having multiple conversations over the course of the next few weeks with people who are like, I'm getting into more software development. I have technical expertise. You know, I can write code. I just haven't been doing it. So, like, what does this new job look like? Well, it looks a lot like the things that maybe you're most afraid of doing in that, which is why maybe perhaps you did this other job as opposed to being a software developer. So, example, someone submits a piece of code and doesn't want to, or hasn't, maybe doesn't want to, doesn't know how to, hasn't had the experience, whatever the case may be, to examine and understand the upstream and downstream impacts of those changes. Oh, are you not comfortable with that ambiguity? Like that's my first question. Just being blunt with people. Are you not comfortable with that uncertainty? Right? Well, yeah. Okay. So get comfortable real quick. Right? the longer you spend being uncomfortable in something, the quicker you're going to learn comfort. As a human being, not as a software developer, as a human being, I've realized that comfort is my enemy. The more comfortable I am, the more growing stops, I should say. The more uncomfortable I am, the less I grow. So when we're doing something, we get uncomfortable with that uncertainty, right? That's our indicator to go, I need to figure out how to use my best judgment to manage the risk involved here and still move forward. So I hope that the 4-part thing, naming it. So here's the thing. The 4 parts I gave you, and I'm going to give you again, they're not going to remove ambiguity. What they're doing is helping us establish a system and a methodology to make ourselves more comfortable in dealing with that ambiguity. By naming it, the first thing we do is we name it. One of the primary purposes behind naming the uncertainty is to remove our fear of it, is to allow us to have something to face, because the only way to get over our fear of something is to face it, right? Having something to face for fear, right? And now we're logically tackling it, writing the working model, defining the next bounded action, tracking any unresolved risk, which is tracking any unresolved ambiguity or uncertainty. All those things allow us to put that into the box and go, I have no reason to fear something that I understand a lot better, even if I don't understand it fully. So I hope that helps. Next session, we're going to talk about capacity, overcommitment, and why intensity gets mistaken for reliability. And of course, thank you all for coming today and talking to me. Appreciate it. And if you guys want anything before the next session, you can always reach out to me. You know where to find me. All right.